Hi everyone, today I want to do a sort of mini review slash preview of the Great War Western Front. It's not what I would call a full review, as sadly I've only had a few days with it, and due to the nature of this type of game, I feel to properly review it you need to spend a lot of time with it. These types of games where you have a big campaign map, a black hole for time. There's no escaping that, and I believe giving games the time they deserve where possible before doing a full review. So I'm still going to work on that and continue playing the game. So, firstly, many thanks to the game publisher, Frontier Foundry, and development team at Petroglyph for the key to review the game. As ever, and I always state it, although I've received the key for free, it will not affect my review. I will be giving a fair and honest review and my own opinions, for better or for worse, with my future interactions with said publishers. However, that's the way it is. Today I'm going to mainly focus on the campaign, and specifically the Allied campaign, I guess, as that's where I've spent most of my time. I've not yet tried the multiplayer, and I feel like that will be a completely different kettle of fish. So first, let me give you the usual spiel about the game for those who've maybe not seen it before. So the team set out to create a very immersive World War I strategy game which reflects difficult choices commanders faced at the time. There are a variety of ways to play. There's the campaign, which we'll be discussing more today, the historical battles, which are a selection of real pivotal World War I battles with unique objectives. There's the skirmish games against the AI to practice your tactics or whatever else. And then finally, there is the option of 1v1 multiplayer. The game launches on the 30th of March, but pre-ordering gets you early access on the 27th, aka today. Currently, it is priced at £29.99. And that's the standard version, and if you want the fancy version it's £34.99. The game is available on Steam and Epic as far as I understand it. Now, a little comment from myself is that I think it is very reasonably priced at £30. Granted, I would also say I'm not sure I would recommend it in the same way if it was priced at £60 or £50. I think it's at a good price point for what you're getting in this game. And I think they've realised that and, put it out at that price. So they've also provided minimum and recommended requirements for the game, and I'll put them on the screen now. And I'm putting them here because I think they're relatively high, and I noticed it giving even my system a bit of a kicking, which has me worried a little bit about how well it might run on some machines. So please do take a good look at this before you purchase the game, and, bear in mind you may have to turn some settings down. But enough of all that, let's get into talking about the actual game. So first, let's hit the ground running, as the game does, with a very well executed tutorial. I honestly can't fault it. Some of you may have played this in the previous demo, as I did, but I decided to play it over again just to refresh my memory and make sure I had all the basics down. I think it's a really smooth and well implemented tutorial, and it gives you a very solid intro to the game, and I would strongly advise you do it, as if you don't and you just start the campaign without it, you just kind of dumped in without any help. It covers understanding the campaign map, upgrading buildings, defensive battles, offensive battles, and you even can continue it afterwards if you want, though honestly, I would just start your own campaign. It also covers various choices you will have to make, where the options have both positive and negative outcomes, the so-called hard choices of the campaign. Next up, let's talk a little bit about the campaign map itself. So it's pretty much what you would expect from this type of game. A hex-based map with a front line running north to south, units represented within each region or hex tile. Each unit type is split off into its own stack, so one for infantry, tanks, one for heavy fixed artillery, and one for aircraft, and then you can stack multiple of each on top of each other therein. Each region or hex tile has a star rating. Each time you suffer a great loss, you lose a star. If you lose all the stars, that region transfers to the enemy. The same as if you surrender, that region transfers to the enemy. Fairly straightforward and easy to understand. One thing I really did like about the map was that as you progress through the turns, the weather changes, so you get snow in winter, dry summers, and periods of heavy rain, and these effects are represented on the campaign map within each of the regions that they're affecting, and those effects then translate into the RTS battle maps for those regions. Overall, I think the UI is really nice, it's straightforward, everything has a clear tooltip explaining what it is, and I never felt lost with the available buildings and espionage options, or indeed moving units about. The same with the starting an attack, it's nice and clear arrows showing where they're moving to, and the details of cost and availability of supply and extra before you hit the start battle button are all very much available to you. The campaign map also has various hard choices that pop up on the screen, submissions or quests that give you extra rewards, and also you get random events and news articles based on how you are performing. Multiple losses in a row, for example, will be reported in the press and possibly result in an additional drop of national will. And there are extra little features that make the world feel more alive. National will obviously is very important when you're at war, and if it drops to 0, you lose the campaign. So keep that in mind. One thing I would like to note is those coming expecting massive movement of the front line during the campaign, please dampen those expectations. While it is totally possible to move the front line and even push the enemy all the way back to their capital of sorts, this is a war of attrition, and it is repeatedly stated after combat this war is fought by inches and not miles. If you want to enjoy this game initially without getting frustrated, you really need to get into that mindset. You don't have to push the front line very far. You can rely on dropping the enemy national will by winning battles. And speaking of battles, let's head into that portion of the video. This will be a little bit longer as there's a lot to talk about. So firstly, let's talk about the battle maps because I think some of the features here are very well done. The whole setting up the battle which you come to first I really like. This gives you a chance to pre-place trenches, defensive structures, artillery, and use special abilities like pre-battle artillery barrages and tunneling bombs under the enemy trenches. And more importantly, it allows you to place half-price units. Make sure you buy your expensive stuff like tanks here, otherwise they'll be costing you 100 apiece instead of 50. There's also different levels of trenches, which again I think do persist if you buy the more expensive ones, but honestly I avoided placing them for the most part so far because they are so expensive, and rarely did I have spare supply early on. A word of warning is to consider how many artillery pieces you need for a battle. Each heavy artillery initially costs 90, and that's 10 regular heavy artillery bombardments, at a standard 9 supply each. So if you put down too many artillery pieces, you're not going to be able to shoot them anyway. But I really like the fact that some things do persist, like the trenches, so if you've set it up on that battle map, when you go back your trenches will still be there. The other thing I liked about the maps were the weather effects. Blizzard reduced line of sight, which makes sense. Rain reduces movement speed, etc, etc. And the battlefields also changed over time. So once a map with pockets of forest, over multiple battles, it will become decimated to a no man's land. So firstly, trees just being felled in certain positions, and then I presume vanishing completely. So it's nice that there's some kind of progression and persistence to the maps other than just your trenches. Tree lines hide your units, by the way, which can be very beneficial, but they also hide enemy units, so approaching them can be a bit of a risk. Overall, I really liked the maps. They had a lot of variety, but they stayed true to the whole trench warfare with a no man's land in the middle. The little extras like the persistence and progression were very much appreciated, and as I say, the weather effects were a nice addition as well. Okay, let's move on to the battles themselves. Some of this might be a little bit controversial. So, RTS battles within the game are something I was very worried about when first reading that someone was making a World War I game. Trench warfare was horrific, and I'll spare you the history lesson. These battles were just very repetitive and very much a meat grinder. And sadly, at least early in the campaign, this is very much translated into the game. Some of you might like this, some of you might not, but your mileage will vary. Let me give you a little context, because while I really did not enjoy the start, it does get better once you get research options unlocked. So far I started 2 campaigns from the Allies side. You see, you have 2 choices at the start, either 1914 or 1916. The major difference here is the tech level more than anything else. And I'll be honest with you, I truly wish they'd added more options here. For example, starting in 1916 or 1917 with all the research points available to you to spend how you wanted it, rather than, it already being pre-spent for the most part. The early game starting in 1914 is a completely horrific slog. The battles are extremely repetitive because you literally have basic infantry, basic arty with no special attacks and nothing else. And now your personal mileage, as I say, may vary, but after playing the same battle several times over, I was getting very bored and frustrated with the game. There's only a 2x speed option, so you can't really rush things along either. So much I was frustrated by it that I started over a few hours in and went for the 1916 start, as it was the only other option which at least had a little bit more advanced technology, enough to give me a few more options in battle, at least sooner than would have otherwise been available. Now I know what some of you are sat there thinking. You're thinking, well, why didn't you just use the auto-resolve if the battles weren't that fun rather than suffering through them? Well, as with many of these games, the auto-resolve gives terrible results compared to what you can achieve yourself. If you are attacked and suffer a great loss, your region loses a star. If it loses all its stars, you lose the region. Now in fairness, it's rare that auto-resolve predicts this, but taking a lesser loss or even a stalemate from the auto-resolve can mean you lose an infantry company, and once it's gone, it appears to just be gone. And as far as I can tell, you never get that back, and the enemy already outnumber you massively anyway, so you kind of need your infantry, so using the auto-resolve can be risky. And any auto-resolve defensive battles that aren't positive for you, which they won't be or the enemy wouldn't attack, means that you will lose some national will. Do this enough times, it will reach 0 and you lose the campaign. Do you see where I'm going with this? So admittedly, after I restarted the new campaign, I did end up auto-resolving some. There was a point where I had to say, oh, well, I've auto-resolved enough now, I really need to actually fight some, so I get a positive outcome and force them to concede or, call a ceasefire when they're attacking me. But honestly, I didn't attack for a long time. For the first year or more of the campaign, I didn't attack. The battles were so grueling with the basic infantry and not much fun at that stage. I just kept buying new planes and tanks and completing research and basically building up forces. You don't have to attack, you don't have to push. If you can defend well and force down the enemy in terms of their national will, you're still kind of winning the campaign. When it came to the defensive battles, I worked out a very clear system, or so I thought, to deal reasonably well with the AI attacks. Basically layering my trenches and making sure I had one squad in each trench, basically to cause as much damage as possible to the incoming enemy forces. Yes, you can put 2 of your squads in a trench, but one of them isn't firing, one of them's just there to switch out or engage in melee combat. It was much more effective to have them all spread out firing at the enemy. Now, the AI got ahead of me, unfortunately, in research. I assumed they'd cheat a bit, and they had elite infantry squads with snipers and grenadiers and flame troops before I did, and these were annoying, but my layered trenches kind of handled them okay. But then they hit me with tanks, and this being World War I, there are no anti-tank guns. The tanks are completely devastating. They just roll up to your trenches and mow everyone down while taking very little damage from standard infantry. They don't seem to throw their little grenades at the tanks, but they will at static defences. So to deal with tanks, you either need grenadier squads yourself and let the tanks get close to them in a trench and then they can throw their grenades, because if they're out in the open, the grenadier squads are going to get wrecked by the tanks before they reach them. You need bombers, which you don't control, and you just have to hope they decide to bomb the tank. Mortars, which are an expensive pre-placement that the AI will hammer with artillery anyway, so it might not even survive till the point that the enemy tank arrives. Or you have your own tanks to deal with them, and honestly, while artillery is also an option, the AI is reasonably good at moving their tanks out of the line of fire. Basically, the honest truth is, be it for defense or attack, the tanks are king. And after rushing to get these, I simply put 1 stack on every single frontline region. They provided an additional benefit, that is, the AI will also try to focus its artillery fire on them. With a passion, might I add. You can just keep rolling them out the way and letting the AI waste its available supply, though it should be noted they will take damage if they get caught. I should also probably note at this point that the AI seems to cheat. It seems to be able to see the entire map other than inside trees, and also knows the direction or commands you give your tanks before the tanks actually start moving that way. That also applies to any infantry you move as well, but because they focus on the tanks, they do try and pen tanks in sometimes. So say you're rolling forward and then they'll put one there, and then you try to move to the side, they'll put one there. You get the idea. It can be a little bit frustrating that they know what you're doing before your tank even does. The other thing other than tanks that the AI likes to focus on, as I say, are static defences. So if you have spare supply, sticking down a few random MG turrets away from your actual troops in trenches will mean the AI wastes arty shots on them, and they have a limited supply like you do, so it's worth doing that. You know, it's a little bit cheesing the AI, but it works. Or at least it did work. What I am going to say is that a lot of the things that I'm mentioning here have been fed back to the team already, and they are releasing a patch today which will fix a lot of this stuff. So the AI is getting a bit of a rework on its artillery use, for example, is what I've been told. So yeah, initially I was really not enjoying the battles. They were fun for a couple of times when you just had the infantry and you were pushing the enemy and you were taking positions, but as soon as they get ahead of you in tech and you're sort of doing the same thing where you're just having to be very defensive over and over and over again, it got very boring and frustrating quickly. But once you get tanks, you get gas artillery shells, you get the creeping barrages, the gameplay changes considerably in the battles, and it starts to feel like less of a horrible slog, and you can start experimenting with new tactics, like gassing the enemy trenches and moving your tanks in to easily mow down the fleeing troops. Yes, this is war, and yes, I'm a monster. But I've now hit this point in my campaign and I'm actually really starting to enjoy some of the battles again. And I'm starting to attack the enemy because I have those capabilities that make attacking a little bit more fun other than just throwing lambs to the slaughter half the time. But that's where I'll end my rambling about the battles for now. Maybe you can experiment with yourself and let me know what tactics you come up with in the comments down below. So one thing I've not touched on too much yet are the additional features and specials of units. Some of this is kind of spoilers for the tech tree, so you've been warned, but some of them add a lot to the game and really change up how the battles progress. The Allies, each nation has a special bonus for their basic troops. The French are half price, the British troops have a better range on the rifles. The Americans get a bigger bonus from being near tanks, just a few examples. Tanks provide a morale bonus to allied units, and they provide a debuff to enemy forces they get near, but just don't let them get too near enemy grenadiers cause they will be killed. Arty gets various special shots such as gas or airburst for the large ones and then smoke and creeping barrage for the small ones, and that's just a few examples, but it gets the idea across. Let's have a quick look at the tech tree. It's fairly expansive. Some things are just improvements on the previous items, but there are also brand new units to unlock, such as the tanks, the elite infantry, the flame troops, the grenadiers, and honestly I found myself focusing on the infantry, engineering and aircraft sections myself, with a little sidetrack into resources and things like that. But you can really unlock whatever you want, though note you won't be able to afford everything in a single campaign. So my thoughts so far. The game has a lot going for it. The campaign map is really well made, it's easy to understand, the battle maps are great, and I like the fact there's persistence and weather effects. I like the fact that there's those extra features with special upgrades for the units and special abilities that you get later in the game. Sadly, the early game battles grow tedious very quickly, and I was wishing for a faster speed mode than 2 times, but once you get some tech unlocks, it really does make a difference. The tanks and the better RT options really dramatically improved things, and it feels less like this horrible slog as I mentioned. I would note that I found that sometimes giving units commands in the game is a little bit sluggish and they take a moment to respond, and those orders don't always flow very well, with the units not seemingly ending up where I intended them to, and I don't know how else to explain it. But they seem to not maybe always jump in a trench that I told them to and just stand next to it. Also, I found the units got stuck a couple of times when moving through the trenches. Now, one thing it is missing is an attack move command, which I found very annoying for the infantry. The AI auto stops to engage you, but your troops just keep running. I can understand this when you charge at a trench and you don't want to stop, but out in the open I would really like an attack move command, but I couldn't find one, and considering how fast infantry die out in the open when being shot and not returning fire, I really noticed it was missing. So if there's one there and I missed it, I take it all back, but please let me know in the comments, but otherwise, attack move doesn't exist here and I'm not entirely sure why. I think overall, my experience of the game has been very positive. My only negative really that's not sort of nitpicky is the early battles growing very, very tedious very, very quickly and me just not wanting to play them. I think that it would be nice if you could start the campaign with more research points or a couple of years ahead with the research points available for you to spend. Something like that would be a nice addition here. One last little thought I have is I'm a little bit worried about the performance of the game and how it runs on people's machines. Obviously, the recommended requirements are quite high. It runs okay on my machine, but I can tell that it's being pushed by how warm it's getting. So as noted, please do have a good look at the recommended specs and make sure you meet them to avoid disappointment and the fact that you may have to adjust your settings a bit. I think if I summarized it down to one line, it would be that I can really recommend the campaign in the later stages, but early on it's just quite frustrating. But your experience of this may be different to mine. But I really am starting to enjoy it once I got all of these unlocks, and I actually want to go back and play it, where at the start I was like, oh, do I have to play this? Do I have to boot it up and do another one of these really boring repetitive battles at the start? And my answer was that I just didn't do the battles. I just either auto-resolved where I could, or just tried to skip and not do any attacking until I'd unlocked the tanks, for example. So there are certainly ways around the most frustrating part of the game for me. But stay tuned to the channel, I'll have some more videos on this. I'll try and do some streaming of it as well, and I'll try and put up some tips and tricks videos, and you know, we'll pull up a proper review when the time is right. Thanks for watching everyone, please do like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you all soon for some more strategy.